everyone, and welcome. I'm with Kristy Johnson. My name is Lily Landakusik, and this is Voices of Hope. And this series is specifically about helping overcome trauma. And Kristy is just a wealth of information. I always get emotional talking and even preparing for today's message. I'll just shoot out a little bit about what we're going to talk about, and then I want to turn the time over to Kristy. But we're going to go in depth more in the new year about setting an intention with overcoming trauma. And I can be the first to say how important that is, because in my journey, sometimes I can feel like I'm going the right direction and I'm really in a tailspin, so looking at intention, she had a movie made about her family and all of the areas of legal, emotional, familial, financial, with your reputation in moving forward with your children, grandchildren. So I'm really excited. I gain so much, Kristy, every time I talk to you. So before I shift over, I want to just say to everybody out there, my warmest happy holidays and season's greetings. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and any messages you have about being vulnerable with intention at the holidays.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Kristy Johnson here. And I'll speak first to the holidays because Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. You know, the holidays are probably the hardest, I think. And it, depending on your family situation, it could be, trauma based. It could be you've had a death in the family. It could be just that you're getting older and you're more alone now and your kids are off, celebrating with their own little families. But these are really vulnerable times that we're in. And, you know, I think one thing that helps me is like you may have a really good Christmas one year and you seem to have a lot of friends around and it seems like it's going really well. And then you'll have a Christmas where you're more alone and people don't seem to reach out like they used to. And these are just temporary. One year could be great and one year could not be great. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that it's
Well,
it's going to pass. So if you could, like one year it can be great, one year it could be kind of rough. I remember one year, when everything kind of came out with our family and part of my brothers and sisters, we had been kicked out of our family home and we had nowhere to go. And we did find some people that let us, or some friends I grew up with that let us stay on their couch, for a couple months. And that was really rough. And it was during the holidays. And, they were all off celebrating. And, we were just kind of huddling with each other. And I kept thinking, this can't be my life. But the thing is, it wasn't my life. It was just that year that it was really rough. And that's what I want everybody to remember is next year it might get better. This year, I think it's really important that we reach out to someone, that we ourselves do that. We as humans have a tendency, where all your thoughts when you're alone can get really dark and you can feel the emotions and you start dwelling on things that are very harmful. And you can see people on television or out in the streets and, or at the stores and they're so happy and they're buying all these things, but we don't know people's lives, you know, and we just have to remember that we really aren't alone. And if you need to reach out to somebody, you really should, make a phone call to somebody you haven't talked to in a long time. You be the person that does that, instead of just feeling that overwhelmed, by
I
yourself.
I get so much out of my conversations with you, and honestly, I they always make me feel emotional. And I guess I want to be able to talk to you about that with people that may repress emotion, go into denial, or maybe even use substances or isolation. It kind of makes me emotional because I feel like there's so many people that won't talk about abuse or trauma. And so there's this silence and this taboo. And even just that, to breathe through it, you've been through such, unbelievable. And I look at other people too. My case is really severe, but I look at other people's cases that are so much worse than mine. And then I see how healthy and I know they're not perfect, and I know they may cry at night or put their head in their hands and just say, how do I go on? But
Yeah.
where you have come so far from being a child of severe abuse to seeing your family stand up and actually facing your abusers, and where you're at now, what do you feel about that journey of overcoming? What message would you say when people like me get emotional and feel like, oh, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to cry right now. Like I can feel it.
Yeah.
I
Just
can feel it.
building. Yeah, and that's okay. The thing is, we have to welcome our emotions. Like, I wouldn't deny them. I wouldn't be ashamed of them. If you need to cry it out, if you're feeling triggered, if you get that anxiety, people want to take something to overcome it. And I'm all for, whatever, like not talking about substance abuse, but, self-care and whatever we need to do, to take care of that. But sometimes it's okay to sit in it for a little bit because you're needing to acknowledge, and I'm going to get a little, you have to sometimes sit in it for a little bit and allow yourself to feel those things in order to move forward. you know if you don't do that, you're always keeping busy, and you're always kind of putting it on the shelf, and you're always trying to like focus on cleaning or taking care of everybody else. But then it always kind of hits you at some point, like, wow, when am I going to deal with this? Or is somebody coming in to rescue me? Or I think I was waiting for that. Is somebody going to stand up? Is anybody going to say anything? Like, this isn't right. And it took, um, it just, there is something within ourselves if we allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel, because I think that that sparks the need for a change. Because at some point you're going to get tired of it, and you may hit a little bit of anger. And that's what happened with me. I was fed up, and when we decided to finally go to the police, I was fed up because I heard one more leader say, well, let's deal with it. We don't need to report this. And I'm thinking, this is a crime. You don't get to tell me, you don't get to do that. So I felt the anger. I allowed myself to feel that, because a lot of times we're afraid of that. And we're told, good girls don't, we aren't angry, or, but I'm not saying go out and smash things. And I guess, if you need to do that, do it privately, but don't push it away all the time.
Right. As a
Allow it.
therapist, I always, it was easier, I felt like, to work with kids who were angry versus depressed. And one of my mentors had encouraged that anger is really a message of change. I want change. This needs to change. It's when anger turns to chronic, just enduring trauma and learned helplessness, and then failure to thrive almost. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And not being heard. And I think that but that's what we're finding, is there's so many resources now, and so many phone numbers you can call, and so many groups you can get hooked into. And that's what's important, is don't just take this anger on yourself. Like, get in touch with it, but then make a phone call and find out what you can do with that. And if that's services that can help you report a crime, there's that. Or if it's being open to seeing a counselor and maybe looking at what happened to you. But don't, ignore those signs that it's like panic attacks. I was kind of described, or I had a therapist one time tell me, like, if you look at a panic attack or anxiety attack as a gift, that your brain is now ready to deal with something, and to look at it that way, instead of being frightened by it, be like, okay, what's happening with me right now? What do I need to look at? What is that? What wants to come out? And sit in it and write or do whatever you need to do. But your body's getting ready to deal with that, which is beautiful. And anger can be a good thing, because that's another signal that something needs to be dealt with. If you're being triggered all the time, okay, why? What is that? Don't
Right.
ignore that.
What boundary do I need? What change do I need? And
Yeah.
you talk about these different strategies and self-help tools that anybody could use, just to start to become more aware of trauma symptoms, identify them, and act on them. I want to just, you're talking about being able to sit in it, being able to let yourself be angry, and being able to accept, different stages of trauma, that you may have a stage where you're not able to even be emotional. You may need to numb, and there's survival skills. So wherever you're at, will you talk also a little bit about how to be vulnerable when you are out of maybe the abuse, like you had started to get into maybe being an adult versus a child of abuse? How do you start to let yourself feel that? What was that like for you when you first started to realize, wow, I can't believe what I went through, that I made it?
Yeah, because part of my survivor skill, because we had reported when I was little, and then in my teen years as well. But I finally had gone almost into like where I was living. I did some separation where I had a home life and then a public life. And then I realized that was my survival, is I had to just pretend nothing bad was happening, and I was able to lead this kind of, from the outside, a very normal life, you know. Um, but then there was a time when those memories forced themselves out, because I got to a point as an adult in my early 20s where it was like, something bad, like something bad has happened to you, and it came flooding back. It was something that happened while I was, serving for my church at the time. And, you never know when these things are going to come up. And so once I had all this flood of memories come back to me, the shock of that was like, oh, now what do I do with all of this? You know? And then the next step was for me reporting that, you know, and you reporting it for me became very empowering, even though I didn't get the results that I wanted. Because you think that everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon, right? Like all of a sudden, your family's going to be super supportive. Like, how could that happen to you? Or the police are like, this is terrible. Let's go arrest the person right now. And in your mind, you're thinking, wow, once I report, like everything's going to fall into place. But then that takes on a whole other life. And then people start finding out, because you can't control that narrative once you make reports. And so then you're dealing now with family relationships, if it was a family member, and then you become vulnerable to that. And then you have to decide, these are all decisions you have to make internally. What are you ready for? Is that person who harmed you in a position to still be hurting other people? For me, that's an obligation to make a report, so that it's on record in case something else is going on. But going from a child of that, and not feeling empowered, and going into adulthood and feeling like now I'm going to, report to the police, um, that was huge. And then to be able to find out, and this is where it's different for everyone, how are you going to deal with it going forward? Yeah, you've made the report. You can't control the justice system, which I'm shocked at. It's, to me, it's, just this black and white issue, right? So it's kind of like, you just expect all this justice to happen and the person to be sorry, and, you know, and it's not always like that. And you might get a lot of backlash, and that's a whole other world you got to take on. So, but the vulnerability is, you got to start deciding what you want out of your life, and it was well into my later years, when we sat across from our perpetrator and had that conversation, and realizing that you think that they might be feeling bad for what they did, right? But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're able to go on with their life, and you're just a person. You may just be one of many victims that they have. And so their care for you may be zero. And
Can I
that's
ask
hard.
you about that? If in your case, did your father show remorse?
He, because a lot of people, don't have the full story, but because he never was arrested. So they knew what he had done. The police knew, the DA's office knew, everybody knew, you know, he, from what we could find, was never questioned. He was never brought in. He was never arrested. According to him, he did go in for questioning and he admitted to all of it, according to him. And we're like, okay, so why were you arrested then? And he's like, no, the DA cut me a deal and told me all I needed was counseling. And we're like, the DA said that, and it was just like trying to follow, like, are you sure? You know what I mean? Like, but none of that happened. Like, nothing happened to him. And, with us as well, the police reports were gone after that. So there was a huge cover up that happened in the county that we were growing up in. So, I mean, thank God my dad confessed, on paper and even in the film, but he wrote letters of confession. Otherwise, where's our proof, right?
What do you think made him confess?
Well, and the thing with him is he partially confessed. He has other victims, and a lot of people don't realize that. So he's never confessed to those. And I'm sure there's still, because of the position he was put in as an educator, and the young people he was asked to work with who were in vulnerable situations growing up, he had power and authority over them. So
Did he have, do you know of abuse that happened to him? Was he a victim of abuse as a child?
that's a great question. And we asked him that. I talked to him in length about it. And he said, absolutely not. He said, I've never been abused. I've never had anything happen to me like that, and I was like, are you sure?
Was he different from the rest of the family? Like, does the family have any other patterns like that? If you were to do a genealogram, does he stand out, or are there like, patterns of similar behaviors throughout the family history?
Yeah, here's the whole interesting thing. And my father was the oldest son of like 10 kids. And his father, my grandfather, was an incredible human being and was very generous, hardworking, was a wonderful father. He was like the mayor, he was the sheriff out in Idaho. He ran and became a state senator for Idaho. He went off to war, so he was a veteran of the war. He got a Purple Heart. He was just very honored and a good man. He oversaw the jail system and like got that, he helped a lot of prisoners. He had a lot of mercy and love for people. And his children to this day adore him. Now, he was killed in a car accident many, many years ago when I was like 2. But the family dynamics was my father at that point became almost the father figure for all his younger brothers and sisters. And because he was always close to his father, I think they kind of needed him to be their male figure, And so I know that my grandmother, just to be very blunt and honest, wasn't that kind of a person. And there's a lot of stories of things that happened, to the siblings growing up, that she wasn't always that kind. I mean, she was extremely mean to me when she came and stayed with us for a while. I mean, like hardcore mean and very rude verbally. And
That was
so
his mom?
that was, huh?
That was his mom?
That was his mom.
His mom?
So, and she's long since passed now. But it's interesting, the family dynamics, because even when all this came out, right, my father ended up calling his siblings and saying, hey, just to let you know, here's what I did, just so that you're aware of it, because it's all going to kind of come out. because apparently it's been reported to the police. And so how that was received by them was very interesting, because there's a lot of them. And to be honest, there's one aunt one of my dad's sisters, that has remained very kind through the years to us and made sure that we got Christmas cards, that if there was a get together, she would invite us to her home. And she was always very loving in spite of, but the other family members, there were a couple of really nice sisters too, but to be very blunt, we were rejected. And for all the big family reunions that happened in Idaho, we were never invited. But guess who was? My dad and his new wife. And he got to be with all the kids there, and the ones who had children, like his siblings, they came and stayed at his house. And everybody pretended like nothing happened. And we're like, hey, we're over here. And that's why I'm saying, like, when this stuff comes out and you report things, you don't know how it's going to land on your family. And it's shocking to me, the family members that can act as if you should have kept your mouth shut, right? Or you're an adult now. That happened when you were a kid. Why are you talking about it?
Right.
Leave him alone. He started a new life. Let him live. You go live your life. And I'm like, oh, well, then what happens to my mom? She's a mess. She put him through how many years of school? What's her payoff in all this? It's just the whole family dynamics. And I think that that's why it's okay to be real honest and just put it out there, because it shocked me to this day that they still have family reunions and we're not invited. And yet he is. And, his wife has now passed, but they all have these holiday pictures with them. When my dad, and when my mom divorced my dad right away after things came out with the cops, right? And so then the church was going to excommunicate him. So my mom filed for divorce. My dad, right, they separated, he's gone. And the cops never picked him up. And he was taken in by family. And he had also been on the high council of the church. And these are like 12 men that are big leaders, right? And then you have these people. And what they did is they embraced him. And he writes, during part of our lawsuit stuff, we got a copy of his journal, and he kept it during all that time. And he described like his church court and how they all embraced him. And, he was fired as the educator for the church during that time. But my point is, they set my dad up on dates. And they set him up with one of his students, a former student of his. And they started dating. And as soon as my parents' divorce was final, he went and got married to her. And one of my friends and I, God bless her, we went and staked out the wedding, because I was like, who one is going to marry my dad, knowing he's a perpetrator? And then who's going to go to the wedding, right? And support all that? But his family came in from out of state. All the high council members, the state president, them and their wives were all there. It was a packed wedding. As I sat down in the parking lot, just watching all these people, and I couldn't believe that he was receiving all these accolades. And, and then they posted, when his wife passed, all these pictures of their wedding and all these people supporting them. And I'm thinking, my siblings and I were homeless for a while after that. Like, nobody was taking us in. Nobody was sitting there, making sure we were fed and we were okay, and, got into counseling. Like, nobody was doing that kind of stuff like they were doing for him. So he's never, ever fallen. He's never been without support, a place to live, without food. And he's surrounded to this day by his community, his church, and his family. And I think, you got to be kidding me. But that's what you have to prepare for in finding your courage and knowing who you are in all this. And then not doubting yourself that you're doing the right thing and speaking forward, in spite of what happens to the perpetrator. Because he may never see the day of, he may never see prison. Why was it covered up? And our particular story is interesting because, we did get counseling, social services got involved eventually. There were 2 investigations. We got help through Victims Witness to help pay for, insurance, for counseling. And when we went back to get all those records, our names have all been removed from social services, from victims' rights, clear up to Sacramento. Like, our attorneys were seeking out like all these records, and there's nothing. So there was this weird kind of cover up in a weird, and so that's hard, and it's like, what do you do with all that? So on top of being able to come forward, you're facing injustice, which makes you want to be like, are you kidding me? I feel like I'm in the twilight zone. Why am I the bad guy now? Because I spoke up, and he's getting married, moving off to another state, you know, and just having a great life.
So much of what you're saying really hits home around the holidays, especially. So many of the things that you talk about, I think, resonate just with the experiences of trauma victims and victims of family violence, because then they get into the justice system and they're re-victimized. And then in the holidays, there's this sense of reminding of all of the times and all the people that didn't stand up. And everybody's saying, well, you should just get over it. You'll be fine. It's the holidays. They'll grow out of it. It'll, come back again. And I like a couple of things that you said. I want to ask you a little bit more about, and, we can close on these.